right, let's move on to our second story. The Louisiana Supreme Court just denied a 62-year-old Black man's request to have his life sentence overturned. Wayne Bryant was convicted in 1997 on one count of attempted simple burglary for trying to steal a pair of hedge clippers. He was sentenced to life in prison under Louisiana's habitual offender law. Just in case you're curious, prior convictions, because obviously habitual offender, he did have prior convictions, they include attempted armed robbery and possession of stolen things, attempted forgery of a $150 check, and simple burglary of an inhabited dwelling. Janika, I want to get your thoughts on not only this case, but habitual offender laws, 3 strikes laws, et cetera, all of that in general.
I think it is egregious, it's inhumane, and it's insane. It's absolutely insane. I mean, at 62, what is this man gonna do? And if he's not rehabilitated by 62, like, I mean, it just makes absolutely no sense. And I did not have an opportunity to really look into that case to kind of delve, because in my mind, I've just been saying there has to be something that I'm missing or I don't understand or that I don't know about this. But the reality is a lot of these states still have these 3 strikes laws. And it does not, and not only states, in federal court, we have the Armed Career Criminal Act. We have, and that's where when you have a felon in possession of a firearm and they've been convicted of 2 prior violent felonies, it's a 15-year mandatory minimum. And we also have the career criminal statutory guideline, whereas, like, for instance, you may have someone who for a long time have been doing just hand-to-hand sales, little misdemeanors throughout their life, you know, and all of a sudden they end up in federal court. Well, now they may have enough convictions or, you know, on their record where now they're considered a career criminal and they're sentenced extremely harshly. In federal court, it's just egregious. These mandatory minimums, these 3 strike laws, I think that not only are they egregious, I think they're applied disproportionately. And I'm saying I think, because I mean, I'm saying I think, but I'm pretty confident that the statistics support that statement, and they should just be done away with. There's no reason that under any system of law, a 62-year-old should not be eligible at this point when we're in the middle of a pandemic, you know, for something, anything less than murder or rape or, you know, something extremely egregious, that person should not be released at this point for compassionate release. And the Department of Justice issued and it wasn't an order, but a letter or advisory opinion earlier on in this pandemic about compassionate release. I'm just shocked that this man was not released. And I didn't see a murder conviction on there or attempted murder or, you know, rape of a child or something that really shocks my conscience as to saying that this man is just not redeemable. And it's just, it's insane. It's scary. And unfortunately, it's a lot of other people just like him.
Yeah. And can I jump in there with you, Janika? Because I really look into this, because these kind of stories, I avoid them, because what happens is I start really drilling into it and really start thinking heavily. And the first thing came to my mind, I want to start with the people part of it, because I know the story in particular pointed out that he has cost Louisiana, I think, $500,000 or something like that. And that to me pissed me off. That one sentence pissed me off, because you just monetized someone's life. And to me, what's more valuable and more important and more significant that was somewhat missing in this article, and I know they didn't intentionally do this, I read some others that did the same thing, but what was the cost to him, his mental health, for his family? I couldn't find much if he was married with kids, but I'm sure he had mother, father, brother, sister. I think about the community. I think about the fact that he could have been a positive contributing person to society, got a job, paid his taxes. I think about all those things, and what it comes down to is that prison has to stop being treated like a business, because these pig laws, these 3 strike laws, all this stuff that is rooted in racism, that's rooted in hating people of color or making sure that some people are below and some people are higher, has really created all these other ways for people to kind of be put back into slave-like conditions. Like this man, and I actually went into this case and read the actual brief, because I was so like blown away. This man was like borrowed someone's car that needed to have a screwdriver to start it. Then the man who reported the Hedge being stolen because someone was in his house, he reported him as white. That somehow got lost in this whole, trial. And then when the guy was found 6 blocks down the road, something like that, he claimed that the Hedge clippers was, I think it said it was his wife's or someone else, and then he had some other things that could have shown that. And so the fact that there's even like this question of she even been in jail, that is, I just cannot get over that. And I think the big reason why now it's even more egregious is that we have so many white people doing so many blatantly legal things in our faces every single day, starting with the top, Trump, and yet we have somebody who stole some hedge clippers who's been in jail for over 20 years. How does that make sense? And that's what really just with this article and story just really pissed me off.
But not only just that article, I tell Brooke all the time, one thing that it gets me going or really ticks me off daily is when I see people who have been in jail so long for marijuana charges, drug charges,
right,
especially in federal court. And then it's like across the bridge over here in West Memphis, Arkansas, some man is sitting at a counter selling it, legally and paying taxes on it. And we're still locking people up. Like people are still losing freedom over marijuana. Like here in Memphis, I can't tell you how many times somebody calls me over a possession charge of marijuana, and you go less than 20 miles across this bridge and you can get you a prescription, whatever it is, and a card, and you can buy it legally. And it's just this idea of, and I think, it just continues to make you have this feeling of almost helplessness, because it's like, what can you do? When it's like something is so blatantly and obviously wrong and no one is fixing it, it's like, what do you do? And just like you said with Trump, if he was the CEO of any company or a president or an attorney or any place in the world, this man would have been out of a job 30 times over, 100 times over for the outrageous things that he's done, and it's just, but it's like, what can you do? It's like, we have these rules in this democracy that I feel like, it just does not work. It sounds good. We've been made to think it's good, but it does not work. And it definitely does not work for people that look like us. That's a fact.
Vince, I think it's interesting that you bring up the cost and kind of how that's worded, but also something that's always been fascinating to me is usually people who are big proponents of long sentences, they like the death penalty. There are also people who are small government. That's what they want. They want small government. They want lower taxes. And it's fascinating that the amount of money, taxpayer funds, that these long sentences, that the death penalty costs so much money compared to life in prison. It's fascinating that how those two things contradict. Many people are advocates of lower taxes, but willing to pay for this.
Yeah, I think
that's always been fascinating to me.
Cognitive dissonance is literally like, that's the definition of it. You're holding these two you can't have both those beliefs. They just don't work. You can't be, like kind of what you said, Brooke. I think what it really goes back to is, I think we have a problem in this country with really addressing kind of the root cause, because again, going back to all this, why is there a need for some people to be in jail? Why have we never fixed these things? And I think right now we're seeing those things crumble. Am I hopeful it will continue? Yes, but I think it goes just realizing that we as a people, we as a community have to know our power, have to know that we have to put the right people in office. We have to pay attention to the different levels of government, because also in this story, which I forgot to mention, was the only judge of, I think, the 6th or 7th Supreme Court Justice of Louisiana, the Chief Justice is a Black woman, only the second in history in Louisiana to ever get to be on the court. And then other ones were white males, and they all voted except one abstained, and all voted to say no. And it's just, that's an example of the fact that we have to have more diversity. We have to have more people that look like us in those roles, in those positions, because that's why I think the Kamala Harris getting put in that VP opportunity was such a powerful moment, because that really elevated Black women's to a level that we have never seen in this country before. And I think that's going to trickle down over time, whether it's through inspiration of other Black women, whether it's getting people to run for local offices. I really do believe if she gets into office and does a good job like she's always done so far, that's going to help overall, because we know Black women get the job done.
Black women do get the job done. I like what you said there.
Yes, I'm sorry.
I like that. I like what you said there. Let's move on to our third.
Go for it.
No,
I was just going to say, we just as a people have to be more intentional about our goals, I think, and collective about what it is that we're trying to achieve. Because I think one thing that we also have to recognize that I've just kind of become a little bit more aware of in the last couple of weeks, I took on that case here in Memphis, and is that, we root for people, but as soon as anyone says, this person did this or this person did that, they're immediately guilty and villainized. And, a lot of times, and I'm not going to say it's necessarily the fault of the Black community, but a lot of times we take on these ideas that have been implemented over all of this time, which I think goes back to the point that Vincent made earlier, and which was a great point that I never even thought of, is they talked about how much it cost the system for this man to be incarcerated, but it didn't discuss what we missed out on as a community from his possible contributions, or what we missed out on as a community from his children, or if he had children, their lack of having a father in the home. And so what we're dealing with now is just the long-term effects of that. And we have to understand that we're going to have to be really intentional in reversing that mindset, and not only other, races and people, but of ourselves as to how we view ourselves. Do we see, and that's something that we've been spending a lot of time on in terms of the bar associations, is implicit bias.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just simply where, a judge may have, and we've been seeing it directly. Fortunately, we had a judge here recently who called out our prosecutor on it, where he had a case with the exact same facts. But in one case, they chose to not charge the white defendant with a gun, and they charged the Black defendant with the gun. Mm. And he forced the prosecutor's office to come before him and explain, and you have to keep this in mind, in federal court, the prosecutor has complete discretion. And so that was huge for this judge to say, I need someone to explain to me why I'm looking at the exact same thing here. And the prosecutor's office chose to to indict on a gun on this case, but not on this one, which added like a mandatory 7 years.
Wow.
But my thing is, imagine how many times that happens, and it just happens. Because we're not really gathering statistics and data in that kind of way. And the prosecutor has, extensive discretion, but just not in just that sense, but just, having people who are not only there for the purpose of being, for the purpose of bringing diversity, but who understand what their actual goal and their mission should be in being there, if that makes sense. Not to say, hey, I have a seat at the table, but I'm just going to take on all of, I'm just going to help you maintain the status quo.
That reminds me of a story. I think it's called Kids Behind Bars. It's on Hulu right now, but I watched the full season, and essentially it's about grown-ups who received life in prison without the possibility of parole or death sentences as children. And after the Supreme Court decision are working, it's showing kind of like the process of working with attorneys on, the Supreme Court decision said that, it basically said almost all life in prison without the possibility of parole sentences for children are unconstitutional. And I say almost because there are so many technicalities when it comes to different state laws that people are slipping through the cracks, right? And one of the stories was about, I don't remember if it was an armed robbery, if there was a murder, an attempted murder, and I feel bad that I don't exactly remember, but there were 4 kids in a car, 3 white kids and a Black boy. The 3 white kids had been committing crimes all day long. They were on a crime spree, which is sounds like a comic book story, but they've been doing stuff all day long. They pick up this Black kid at the mall, and then he doesn't know what's going on, and they go and do the crime that got them all in a lot of trouble. And what happened was 2 of the kids were way too young. 2 of the white kids were way too young. So they couldn't be charged as adults. The other 2, the Black kid and the last white kid, the white kid, they ended up offering him a deal because they didn't feel like they could convict a tiny white guy, but they could convict the Black guy, who was the only one in the situation who didn't even know what was going to happen. He did get convicted, and everyone's out of prison except for him. It also like reminded me of things that we feel like were unfair when it comes to like how our parents treated us, things that we weren't allowed to do because of, I don't know, the ability of you to get in different trouble than other people, or you know, but that just reminded me like of what you just described, Janika, like how often those things happen. And it comes down to a lot of times like prosecutorial decisions. Like, I don't think I can get a conviction on this with this guy, but I can definitely get it on this guy just based on this. And
I think that's a good example of just, I remember when I first started practicing law, I remember I used to tell my brothers, and I don't even know if this is a politically correct statement, I don't know.
It's okay.
But I used to tell them all the time, I have 3 brothers, I'm the only girl, but I would tell them, the system is not fair. So what does that mean? Don't get in the system. Like, don't get in the, like, don't do it, like nothing. But unfortunately, the more I practiced, I realized that the way this thing is set up, they could be following my sound advice and still somehow end up in this god awful system that we have. And I just think that it is, for us to be touted, you know, as the leading country, or at some point we were, I don't know what people consider us at this point, but for us to be, you know, supposedly the world leaders, we have failed miserably as it pertains to just being humane. You know, we've allowed these rules and these laws and these regulations to allow chaos to exist, to allow these disparities to exist, for us to treat people like they're less than human. I mean, you know, just for instance, that Louisiana case, I don't care what the case law looks like, honestly, to be honest. That is a case where that man should be out of jail. That case that you just described with that kid, I don't even know all the facts of it. That is just, that should not be. That should not be. But the way that cases are presented and the way that we follow these rules, most people probably would never even understand that full picture of that story. Do you see what I'm saying? But for someone doing a documentary on it, we would only know this kid was involved in a robbery and now he's in jail for all of these years, but we would not have the context in which he was there, which is really the most important thing when it comes to sentencing. It doesn't matter whether he's the one that was convicted. Okay, what was his culpability? What was his criminal intent? What was his culpability in comparison to other actors? That's what's fair. That's what's right. And it's like some kind of way we've gotten so far away from just what is simply fair, what's simply right. And the stuff that goes on some kind of way, because we've justified it with rules and regulations, somehow the stuff that wouldn't even fly in your home with your kids passes the test in our criminal justice system because it's a rule that we have or have had for all of these years.